I feel like if you are new this week or in the entire month of July, I might need to introduce myself. My name is Mark Roach. I am the Director of Modern Worship and Media Ministry. I got the distinct and mildly rare pleasure of taking a family vacation to Colorado earlier this month and missed 2 weekends in a row, I believe for the first time since I've been here in 2016. Last week, I actually traveled to Boise, Idaho. I learned from the locals there that I've been pronouncing Boise wrong for the last 43 years. Anyway, if you were here 2 weeks ago, you may have seen me, but other than that, I've been a bit scarce this month. With all that said, Dr. Mike came to me a few weeks ago and said he would love to extend his vacation into this weekend, and from my observations, that may be even more a rare thing. So I obliged. I am honored not only that he trusts me with this platform, but also to be able to help him get some much needed family time away. So, possibly inspired by the launch of the Summer Smash Incredibles 2, we've spent July here at Cornerstone discussing some superheroes in Scripture. We've covered quite a bit in the past 4 weeks, and we're on to another familiar character in the Bible. It's the story of Hadassah. You guys all know the story of Hadassah, right? No, you don't know the story of Hadassah? Well, that name is actually mentioned once in the book of Esther, and shortly thereafter it says she was also known as Esther. So now you know if somebody asks you who Hadassah is, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's Esther. A little more familiar to us. The scripture we just read begins with what is quite possibly the most memorable and poetic line of the story delivered by Mordecai, who's Esther's cousin, uncle, father, husband to be. It actually, after much research this week, it turns out that topic of their relationship is actually quite controversial among scholars, but it doesn't really matter in our context. We'll just go with cousin because that's what this particular text mentions in terms of their relationship. The line that I'm talking about reads like this: "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." You may have heard that phrase, "for such a time as this," before in your life. Now, if you don't know the story of Esther, and honestly, even if you do, we probably have some catching up to do, as our text here comes from Esther 4, and the backstory really starts all the way back in Esther 1. The short version of the story is that Esther is deciding whether or not to approach King Xerxes and ask for her people, the Jewish people of Persia and Media, to be spared from government-ordained destruction, genocide, essentially. Now, before your mind goes straight to duh in terms of how easy this decision should be, it is worth noting that even as the queen approaching the king without being specifically beckoned by said king in that day was punishable by death. Harsh, I know, but that was the reality. Only if he extends his golden scepter and waves the sentence would anyone who violates this law be spared. So it's clearly a tough decision, as Esther could be killed just for asking, not to mention the fact that there's no guarantee the Jewish people will be spared regardless of Esther's fate. But let's back up just a bit and provide a little of the backstory just for kicks. Now, Esther, if you've never read the book Esther in the Bible, it's a thick story. So this is going to feel a little like Sunday Bible school story time. We'll interject a little superheroisms in there since that's what we're talking about. Okay, so the book of Esther starts in chapter 1 discussing King Xerxes and his lavish royal celebrations in which he essentially flaunted his wealth and power in the presence of the noblest men in his 127 providences. Well, on the seventh day of these celebrations, King Xerxes was high in spirits from wine and he commanded his servants to summon his wife, Queen Vashti. He essentially wanted to parade her in front of all the people that he had gathered, for she was lovely to look at, the scripture says. Well, Queen Vashti refused, and this did not make the king very happy. In fact, he ended up issuing a royal decree throughout his entire kingdom, which basically forbid Queen Vashti from ever entering the king's presence again, forced her to surrender her crown as queen, and proclaimed that every man in the land shall rule over his household, because you got to set precedent, you know? So you get the idea, kind of the dude we're dealing with here, and a little bit of societal context as well. Now, after this happens, the king summons his minions to seek out beautiful young virgin women throughout his entire kingdom, 127 provinces, to be part of his harem. Now, meanwhile, the scripture mentions this dude, Mordecai, who spoke in the scripture that we read. He happens to have a cousin, we think, whose parents have both perished, and he has brought up as his own daughter. And the Bible specifically mentions that she was not only beautiful, but that she had a lovely figure. I keep making air quotes, but that's because I'm quoting all this scripture. If we fast forward a bit, we find that when Esther appears before the king, he is smitten. He is more attracted to her than any of the women that have been brought before him. And in fact, he instantly just makes her queen. So now she is Queen Esther. Now, it's worth noting that Mordecai had specifically forbid Esther from revealing her Jewish nationality and family background. In fact, she had actually, along with Mordecai, escaped the Babylonians. And just for some modern day context, Babylonia, I heard from some research this week, that is modern day Iraq. And Persia, where King Xerxes ruled, that is modern day Iran. So they had escaped from Babylonia and were hiding their Jewish heritage and religion out of obvious fear. Okay, so there's more. Mordecai makes it a habit to kind of pace outside the king's gates and monitor how Esther's doing. And one time as he's doing so, he learns of some guards who've plotted to kill the king. Now, Esther brings this information to the king. Once it's verified, by the way, she credits Mordecai as the source. It's verified, and the two guards were, of course, taken care of. Now enters Haman, and I promise I'm getting to the point. Haman is one of King Xerxes' nobles who, for an unspecified reason, is honored by the king and subsequently elevated and given a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. Now, clearly, this quickly went to Haman's head as the royal officials at the king's gate begin to bow down and pay honor to Haman, essentially worship Haman. But Mordecai, also hanging out at the king's gate, does not. This makes Haman very unhappy, and this is significant because we have to assume, first of all, that Mordecai had a really good reason not to do this, because this is the reason that Haman issues a decree that would lead to the death of not just Mordecai, but all the Jews in Persia and Media. Yikes, right? So this is turning into a soap opera of biblical proportions. Now, to King Xerxes' credit, he doesn't necessarily know the extent of this decree that's been issued. He just wants to let his golden boy Haman do whatever he wants. Haman must have really impressed the king with whatever earned him these honors. But Mordecai hears of this decree and is justifiably concerned for his people. So what does he do? Well, what he doesn't do is go to Haman and apologize. He doesn't go to Haman and begin bowing before him and worshiping him. which certainly suggests, like I said earlier, that he had a lofty reason not to do so in the first place. Instead, he goes again to Esther, now queen, and asks her to go to the king and request mercy for her people, which, keep in mind, her people are a people whose relationship she has not disclosed with the king yet. If she has by this point, the scriptures do not enlighten us of that fact. So now, the Bible tells us that she had not been beckoned by the king for 30 days, and she needs to make the decision of whether or not she is going to break the law, enter his inner courts, and approach him about this subject. Now remember, this is subject to a death penalty unless the king decides to spare her life. Whew. Are we all caught up? Everybody tracking with me? Okay, so here's what happens. First, Esther decides to ask Mordecai and his people to join her in a 3-day fast. This is mentioned quickly in the story, but it should not be overlooked by a long stretch. Esther is clearly taking this decision very seriously, and she's getting God involved. On the 3rd day, she enters the inner court. Now, this is also mentioned very quickly in the scripture, but this scene would last like 30 minutes in a modern day superhero blockbuster, right? The king is on his throne. He turns and he spots Esther in the inner courts illegally. The music swells, dun, dun, dun. And she just looks so lovely. And he's pleased with her, so he spares her. That's a big deal, though. He spares her and he says this to her: "What is your request? Anything you ask for, even up to half the kingdom, it will be yours." But Esther, she's smart. What she does is she requests his presence at a banquet with Haman later that day. Later that day at that banquet, the king asks again, "What is your request? Anything up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." And Esther yet again asks for he and Haman to join her at another banquet that she will give tomorrow, the next day. Man, this girl likes suspense. Finally, at this banquet, she will make her request known. But wait, another dramatic superhero movie interruption. Meanwhile, in Gotham City, Haman notices Mordecai yet again not bowing to him, and it infuriates him. So he commissions a pole 50 cubits tall on which he'll impale Mordecai later. Yikes. But what he didn't know is the king was having trouble sleeping the night before. So, and I love this, he asks his servants to bring him some chronicles of his reign as a king. You know, some good reading material all about himself to make him feel better so he can go to sleep. Well, guess what he reads in there? He reads about how Mordecai prevented his assassination by outing those 2 guards earlier. But he doesn't see in the chronicles any evidence of accolades being delivered to Mordecai for these actions. Now, this is getting good now, and stay with me because the timing here is crucial. The king calls Haman in, his golden boy, and asks him what should be done for the man who the king delights to honor. Well, Haman, obviously assuming that who else is he talking about but me, starts rattling off some great ideas of how to honor the man that the king delights to honor. Well, the king loves it. He says, "Love it. Do all that stuff for Mordecai. Thanks. Appreciate it." So now Haman, the guy who's planning on impaling Mordecai on this big pole, has to go carry out these honorable deeds and glorify Mordecai of all people. He's absolutely devastated. He hangs his head. He goes home, but not too soon after. He's grabbed by the servants and taken back to this second banquet that Esther is throwing. Finally, at this banquet, the king asks, "What is your request? It shall be granted, blah, blah, blah. Half the kingdom, blah, blah, blah." she replies, "If I have found favor with you, if it pleases you, grant me my life and spare my people." She tells King Xerxes of the destruction her people are to face as a result of a royal decree, and the king is outraged. Who would do that, he says, and Esther gets to point. That dude, your golden boy. And actually, she doesn't use those words. She says, an adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. There's more, too. You guys have to go read this and fill in the blanks, but I'll tell you that in the end, Esther gets Haman's estate, Haman gets Mordecai's pole, and the Jewish people are spared. So, yeah, right. Now, the Jewish people being spared is a little more complicated than that. Like I said, go read Esther. It's a fantastic story. So that is the story of Hadassah, much better known as Queen Esther. It's pretty complex, right? Lots of layers in it. And I think that there's a lot to learn from. So let's see if we can pull a few lessons. We certainly could pull lessons about fasting, praying. We could pull a lesson that a superhero even needs support and a community of people fasting and praying with them. The timeline of how this story unfolds preaches its own sermon about trusting God and his timing. So there's plenty here, but I'm going to choose a few more subtle and nuanced lessons to talk about in my final minutes here. So the first one is this: superheroes aren't swayed by popular opinion. Yeah. So this one's not about Esther at all. It's about Mordecai, the dude who raised all of this havoc in the first place, right? I mean, he's the one that refused to bow down to Haman, which ended up threatening the lives of an entire people, much less his beloved Esther. He started a mess that he couldn't even clean up himself. Or could he? I guess he could have bowed down to Haman. But many scholars have gathered that his refusal was on the grounds of specific Jewish law, which he was simply unwilling to break. Many others think it was a general unwillingness to worship an idol, one of the 10 commandments in the balance there. We see similar situations to this that cause lots of trouble in stories like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego with the fiery furnace, right? The moral of the story, even if it got Mordecai in a heap of trouble, is that what's wrong is wrong, even if the whole world disagrees. And what's right is right, even if the whole world disagrees. Mordecai simply wasn't willing to compromise his values. Now, this next lesson is a big one, and it's probably the most common one taught through this story, but there's some nuance here as well. The second one is that superheroes steward what God has given them. And that's usually what we hear about Esther, right? That she stewarded her beauty. She didn't have X-ray vision. She couldn't stretch her arms across a city block, and I imagine she couldn't fly or run any faster than the next girl. But she was exceptionally beautiful. She stewarded that beauty, and shrewdly so, to benefit her people. Her beauty, like it or not, was the reason she gained favor with the king in the first place, and ultimately the reason she received the crown of queen. She knew that this very gift she had been given could make her the only one who could intervene and save her people. But Esther isn't the only superhero that did some stewarding here. What about Mordecai? I mean, Mordecai stewarded his influence. He brought up Esther as his own daughter, and when it came time for her to make the hardest decision of her life, he steps up big and was able to persuade, let's use a better word here, inspire Esther to do the right thing. And there's even King Xerxes. As flawed as that dude was, he stewarded the power that he had to eventually overturn the ridiculous decree that Haman had issued and spared Esther and her people. These people in this story, they weren't perfect people. They were severely flawed people. But they ended up playing a part in God's divine story, no matter how small that part may have been. They may not have had superpowers like the ones that we see on the big screen, but they used what they did have to do good. Now, there's one more really cool lesson that I want to talk about, but we really need to pause on this one because this should hit home. At least I think it should. And so I have a simple question for you this morning. What about you? What has God given you specifically that he wants you to steward for good? Is it beauty? Yeah, me neither. Maybe you're great with people. Maybe you have a way of shaking someone's hand and smiling in a way that says, you're welcome here. You're safe here. You look around and you wonder why Cornerstone isn't bursting at the seams with people eager to learn about Jesus, but maybe God wants you to be a part of making people feel warm and loved before they even sit in these chairs. Who knows but that you have come to this church for such a time as this? Maybe you have lots of money. It's uncomfy to talk about, but why? We're sitting here talking about a Bible character who literally used her beauty and her smoking bod to deliver an entire people from destruction. Why shouldn't we applaud someone who's rich or just brilliant with money to use what they have to further God's kingdom? In fact, if we read this story right, we should expect it of ourselves, right? Who knows but that you have come into all this money for such a time as this. Maybe you haven't come into money. Maybe you have the gift of prayer. Maybe you're great with kiddos. Maybe you're super creative and could help with our new video team that we're launching. Maybe you're great on social media and you could help get the word out to the community about all the good things that God is doing here at Cornerstone. For such a time as this. I don't have the answer to that question, but you do. What about you? What has he given you? How can you be God's superhero? What's he given you that maybe, just maybe, he gave to you for the specific purpose of giving back to him to further his kingdom? That brings us to our last little tidbit, and it's a good one. It's buried in this story, but it's a good one. Here it is. It's a long one. God doesn't need us in order to accomplish his mission. The real superheroes are those of us who realize we can be a part of it and choose to do so. And this is right here in what Mordecai says in the scripture that we read. Listen close. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance of the Jews will arise from another place. That's gold. That's gold. Did you hear what he just said? This is a guy that trusts deeply in the sovereignty of God, much more than he trusts in the obedience of any people that he knows. If you don't help, it'll still get done. It's God's will. It's going to happen. Somebody else will step up. Okay, then why bother? Stay silent, right? I mean, that's what we do here in the church, right? Did you just tell me that if I don't work in the children's ministry this morning, somebody else will? Sweet. Did you just tell me that if I don't show up early to make coffee, somebody else will? That if I don't contribute to the food pantry, somebody else will? Did you just tell me that I don't have to give any money to the church? That this whole new building thing here at Cornerstone, somebody else will pay for it, the whole building? You just saved me a bunch of money. Why would Esther make the decision that she made when Mordecai gives her such an easy out? Now, look, he did say right after that, he says, her father's house. Now, her father has already perished, right? But you and your father's house may perish if you don't. But she knew that she might perish anyway if she did. Here's what I think. I think Esther stumbled on the great miracle of stewardship. The moment that I believe every superhero eventually encounters. The moment where they realize that God's been working in their lives and has brought them to this very moment so that they could use the very gifts that they've been given by God to write a couple of words in the narrative, the best narrative that's ever been penned. A beautiful and epic story in which good, ultimate good, triumphs over evil in all its forms, and peace, hope, and love win the day. Superheroes just get it, friends. That's the only difference between them and us. They've decided to be a part of what God is doing, and they've decided to use anything and everything that they have to do so. And their reward? The beautiful, indescribable feeling of looking back at a spared people, at a flourishing church or ministry, a renovation, a new movement, a disease cured, a social injustice righted, and being able to say, I got to be a part of that. Esther could say that. She was able to say that. So was Mordecai. And the question that we face today and every day we stand before God is, will we? Let's pray.